Will, a young slave boy, appears at the door of a farm owner. The owner is an old lady living alone with her slaves. She wields a shotgun. She takes the young boy to the barn with the other two slaves, thinking he is a runaway. Will waits in the barn until the others fall soundly asleep and then sneaks outside to find his handler, Marcus, and the bounty hunter, Burrell. He informs them of the number of men in the barn, and the bounty hunters storm into the compound, killing the old lady and dragging the slaves out. The next day, the slaves are returned to their masters. One of Burrell's men manhandles one of them, and Burrell shoots him straight in the shoulder for hurting another man's property. He has to apologize to the slave. That night, Burrell has a new job for Marcus and Will. They have to go find a man named Nate who has escaped to the north and then lure him back to the south to be killed by Burrell and his gang. They go find an abandoned shack, and Will has to practice getting up and sneaking out of the shack silently without awakening the sharp senses of Marcus. He's supposed to do this when they find Nate and bring him back. He gets it right the third time. They begin the long walk to find Nate, and finally, they arrive at the Northern Army to find he is digging graves for fallen soldiers. Will approaches with his baby face and says he has a message for him from his dying brother. He wants to see him one last time before he passes on. Will also adds that they are being paid to find him to further convince him. Nate decides to go with them. They leave the next day before sunup, and Nate guides them away from the war-concerned areas as they make their way south. Marcus is not keen on following his lead, but when he hears gunshots going off far away, he realizes they just might have been saved. Will tries to start up a conversation with Nate, but Nate is not too happy about the young boy's constant talking. However, he manages to get information from Nate that he wasn't a runaway slave. They reach a river and stop to take a rest. Marcus is surprised to see Will holding onto a gold coin. He remarks how it was such a big amount of money for a child. Will says he got it from his father. A body floats up from upstream, and they all stare at the sight of what might happen to them at any time. They continue their journey, but Nate is on his guard most of the time. Marcus wants Will to test the waters and try sneaking out that night to see how well Nate sleeps. Also, he should stop trying to befriend him. Will tries to sneak out that night, but Nate quickly wakes up and asks where he's going. He has to pretend that he wants to relieve himself. The next morning, Nate wakes up to find his stash of pork food missing. He accuses Marcus because he does not like him. They get into a little argument, and Nate takes his things to continue his journey alone. Marcus and Will quickly follow him. They reach a field with the bodies of runaway slaves littered all over. Nate says they should only take water from them, but a greedy Marcus even rummages through their pockets for coins and food. Will only looks forward to having developed the consciousness of not setting up Nate to die since he is a good man. Marcus only encourages him by telling him they will be paid so well he will have enough to find his father. They take a rest again among some trees, and Will asks Nate again about his family. He says there is a woman named Rachel whom he once loved but left behind. He decides they should continue their walk. Will, in an unexpected act of kindness, decides to fetch water for Nate before they continue their journey. They reach a clearing, and Nate decides to take refuge there for the night. Nate does not want them to start a fire as it will draw attention to them, but Marcus stubbornly drags Will along and they go fetch firewood. The next day, they wake up and find the place on a battlefield with Northern soldiers running away from Confederate soldiers. They exchange fierce fire, and Marcus and Will wake up shocked. Marcus is shot dead by a Confederate soldier when he tries to run away. Will is strapped up by a soldier, and when he is almost taken away as a slave again, he is saved by Nate, who appears behind a tree and manages to kill the Confederate. He now begins a new journey with Nate alone. Will is shocked, though, that Nate came back for him. They go through a heavy swamp and find a community of slaves living there, celebrating a wedding. They are invited and given a meal for the night. Nate apologizes to Will for losing his uncle, but Will is not happy that Marcus was running away and leaving him behind. The next day, they continue their journey, but Will is more silent than usual. When Nate tries to teach him how to handle the axe, he confesses that he was the one who stole his pork. Nate punishes him with a slap, telling him that if he had borrowed from him, he would have given it to him. Will almost confesses that he is leading Nate to his death, but bounty hunters pass through and they have to hide. They continue the trek. Nate almost suspects Will when he changes his story about where he will end up after this, but Will puts on a stone face and lies. As they continue their walk, Nate advises Will to keep off troublesome women, and the boy and man laugh at that. They reach an abandoned camp, and as Nate checks the place out, Will is snatched up by Royce, who had broken up with the Burrell's gang. They use him as a hostage to get Nate to surrender and kill him as a bounty. Nate comes back, but when he is almost shot, Will saves him by diverting Roy's gun. The shot misses, and Nate then finishes off Royce and his sidekick. Nate is grateful to Will for saving his life. That night, Will questions Nate about the integrity of doing something bad that he has no choice but to do. Nate comforts him by telling him that in that case, he is not at fault. The next day, Will convinces Nate to go see his woman before he goes to his brother. Nate changes course and goes to see Rachel. When he reaches the farm, he finds a new man in his place. The man informs Nate that Rachel never forgot him, but she never thought he would return. While returning, he meets Rachel, who is coming from work, and she is very angry at him for abandoning her. They part ways this time for good, with Will staying with Nate. They reach the shack, and Will is sent to buy some blankets and food. On reaching the shops, the coins are not enough, and Will has to add his gold coin to the count. He also buys some whiskey. He takes it to Nate in the shack and convinces him to drink. The man drinks his troubles away and then sleeps soundly. The next morning, Will sneaks out of the shack early in the morning. He goes to Burrell's camp but decides not to meet him. He goes and releases the horses to delay them, but as he goes back, he runs into Burrell. He tells Burrell that he has brought Nate back, but only has to get the knife he has from him. Will quickly returns to the shack and tries to warn Nate to run away from the place. He confesses that he was made to lure Nate back to the south. But it is already too late. They are surrounded by bounty hunters. Burrell calls Will from outside to come out before they kill him too. Nate then tells Will that it is not his fault and stabs Will's leg with a knife in order not to draw any suspicion from him. As Will lies helpless on the floor, he leaves all his money with him, telling him to leave half with Rachel as he heads north to find his father. Nate runs outside and is shot dead by the bounty hunters. Burrell then let Will go free for a job well done. Will returns limping to Rachel, and Rachel looks on sadly, seeing there is no Nate by his side. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. I'll be back with another interesting movie recap. Until then, take care.